CPG markets, the particular Apex class need to be invoked multiple time, and it can be utilized as a common utility. So which means you need to define the particular class as public, so that you can call it from anywhere in through our business triggers or something. You can achieve the same code in multiple achieve the same code calculation in the multiple places. And I know you are, some of them you are coming from the .NET background. If you know the model view controller concept, the Apex class is connected to the controller part. Just giving you the idea so that you get easily idea about the Apex classes. And finally, the third part is methods. In methods, whenever you are having the Apex classes, you have default constructor method, which means when you are defining the Apex class and in your Apex code, by initializing time itself, your constructor will be called. For example, you have at the same time you can have multiple methods, say for example to do the queries, or to do the DMLs, or whatever you can do by using multiple methods. But at the time of initialization you want to do some business logic, then the constructor method will be used. The extension constructor also we have it. This is also the same like constructor, but additionally, if you are connected to the Salesforce page, then you can have one more. You can have the subject access values within your extensions constructor. So that is additional privilege. And I told you earlier, in the methods also you can define the access modifier, how it can be accessed, public or private, and global. And additionally, we have static methods. So in REST, for example, if you are trying to do the integration callouts like REST API or the SOAP API, the static methods are very important because it can be called from anywhere, from the different system also. For example, you have imagine you have a SAP system and as well as Salesforce system. So you need to connect, you need to send the data from Salesforce to SAP by invoking some method. Okay, that is, we can make the method as static, so that the SAP can call our Salesforce method and they can invoke it and they can receive the data. So the static methods are important when you're going back to the integration concepts. And finally, if you are not defining any access modifier in your class or in your variables and in your methods, it will be considered as private. So it will be connected to only the connected user interface components. Okay, and the method, if you are defining if you look at the right side code snippet, I just mentioned the method name is void save. It means the method returns nothing, but at the same time you can return some string variables or the subject values, or you can returns the integer values too. So integer values too. Then let's talk about the global class. The global classes, okay, sorry for the interruption. The global classes I just now mentioned, you can connect the same global class from anywhere, from the different environments, and one developer or to another developer to invoke some methods. And when you are defining the static methods, the Apex class needs to be mentioned as global class. So these are the points we have covered right now. So imagine when you're planning to write an Apex class, think the three parameters. What are the methods you are going to place it, and what are the variables you are going to use it, and finally what kind of access modifier you are going to define it for the variables or the methods or the Apex class. So three things. It's a very basic example, but we will cover it in detail if you are going to the advanced level. Now I'm just mentioned how Apex class structured right now. Now I'm going to explain how our code will be executed by considering our Salesforce security aspects. Okay, so in order to understand the security aspects, we need to understand the two different modes. One is user mode, another one is system mode. User mode and system mode it is very important when you are seeing the Salesforce or directly through our Apex class invoking. For example, uh, system mode is nothing but it generally the Apex code has all kind of profile object permissions and the field level permissions, and it doesn't care about the your sharing rules and sharings and settings. It will go through every Apex code and it will run it without the security impacts. Okay, for example, if you are running the same code through our user control and your user has some security impacts, like the user doesn't has multiple object permissions in order to review the system, then the same kind of logic going to be applied when you are running the class through your user mode. Like, let's take it in one quick example. If you have a user and that user will can see only the account records and contact records, what you will see it in the Salesforce, right? So you will go and see the account and contact. If other objects permissions not available, you cannot do it, right? You cannot see it. In the same way, when you are invoking the Apex class, the security systems will be impacted, and you can see only the respected permission objects in your system, and you can query the same records too. So how you are going to involve the security impacts in your Apex class, that words comes with sharing. So in our previous example, here I'm not mentioned any word here. It is like blank. It's directly I'm mentioning public and class. Here I'm just adding with sharing keyword, which means I'm just introducing the sharing and setting mechanism in my Apex class. So let's take one more example. Please listen carefully. I'm going to ask one more question through my example. Okay. For example, in your organization, and you have 10,000 account records. Okay, and you have key accounts. 400 key accounts are there, and but however your user will have access to 6,000 records, and the same user will have access to 200 key account records only in your Salesforce organization. So when you are running this account service through your user mode, by making the keyword as with sharing, the how many records will be returned in through this query? Any guesses? Here, if you look at the query, select ID name is partner office from account where record type name developer name is equal to key account and limit is 5,000. Just take one quick minute just to understand the question. Just mention the question here also. Any guesses? Okay. Okay, let me tell the answer. The answer is 200. Because I told you earlier, in right now I can query the 400 records, but my user has access only 6,000 records, and within the 6,000 I have only 200 records are visible in the key account type. So this method will return only 200 records within the 6,000 account records. Now let's go to the without sharing class. So if you are defining the Apex classes without sharing, which means it will run it as a system mode and retrieve all the data. So now the same query will return 400 records within the 10,000 overall account records. Okay, so this is a Salesforce beauty. When you're making the sharing keyword itself, you can restrict the records. So in order to understand the security system, I hope you have some idea about the sharing rules and record ownership, and additionally the organization wide defaults behavior. So that's all I now mentioned here also. So when you're defining if you're not defining the keywords, sharing keywords, it will always run it as a system mode. And even though if you're defining the sharing keyword, one thing is you need to understand the sharing keyword means it will provide the record level access only. Okay, it enables the record level access for the custom object and standard object. So it doesn't care about the field level security. Where can be our Apex class can be used? See, you can connect your Aura component controller, which means the UI interface, the Salesforce Aura component controller or Visual Force page. You can connect to the Apex class to do the some business logic and retrieve some value, do the SOCL queries and retrieve some values and send it to the user interface, and user can see it. So those topics will be covered in the next session by our colleague. And the same time, you can do the integration callouts. And just remember, when you're doing the integration callout, you need to make it your classes global, and you need to use the static methods. And you can do the asynchronous jobs. For example, without user interference, you want to calculate some data manipulation, and you want to do the DMLs for some objects without user interface. Then you can make it as, we can define the batch apex or schedulers in Salesforce system, and it will run it on a daily basis, whatever you are planning to give it as a scheduler time. For example, if you're mentioning daily twice or a day or every 1 hour once, the class will run it automatically, and it will do the manipulation, and it will do the queries, and it will do the DMLs if you are mentioned, if you are written the code. The same way, in triggers also, you can connect to the Apex class. The trigger part will be covered by my friend Subhas later. So in trigger also, you can connect one Apex class, mentioning as a trigger handlers to do the data manipulation or business logic calculations. So the same here just I have mentioned what we can do through our Apex methods. We can do the business logics, and we can do we can do the logics and display the values in the user interface, and we can do the queries, SOCL or SOCL, and we can do the DML actions, and we can do the integration callouts, and finally we can do the scheduled based logics through our Apex class. Okay, now let's talk about DML. The DML types are insert, update, delete, upset, and delete, and we will have one more DML type is called merge. But most of the use cases, our business logic will try to get only the insert, update, DML, upset call most of the time. The delete and undelete and the merge options, we will use it very rarely. And we are going to see about what does mean by insert and update and delete and upset right now. The insert is very easiest example. Just you are going to insert any kind of standard object record or custom object record in our Salesforce database by mentioning the statement as insert in front of your subject instance value. Look at this right side of the snippet. I'm just giving a few moments right now. Just go through the right side of this slide. Okay. Here I'm just mentioned the account, the standard object as account, and I just initialized the account object, and here I just given the name attribute as ACME, and I'm doing the insertion of this account. Now through this transaction, I can have, if you look at this example, I have one DML statement, number of process record is only one account. Now now look at the second example. Here I just mentioned this one more time, the account, I just initialized the account, and I just given the Salesforce unique identifier, and I mentioned the name as test account, and I'm doing the upset action. Now the question comes to your mind. Insert, I know that I'm going to create one Salesforce record in our Salesforce database. In the same way, I can update the record, means I can update the attributes. I can, if I'm doing the delete statement, I can delete the record from our Salesforce database. What is meant by upset? Upset is nothing but it's equivalent to insert or update. For example, if you are defining the account ID, the unique identifier, the Salesforce unique record identifier is ID. And you are mentioning the ID value in your account instance, it will be considered as update action for update actions. In the same time, if I am not providing any kind of value in this unique identifier, it will be considered as a insert option. So what you are going to perform, either insert or update, the answer is which value you are giving to the unique identifier. Are you giving the value to the unique identifier like ID or external ID or not? Based on the value you are giving to them, the action will be performed, insert or update. Now, if you look at the whole example, I done one insertion, one upset action. Indirectly, this is update action. So I just mentioned two TML statements. One is insert new account and another one is upset new account. And I processed only two records, the ACME account and the test account. Now we have a governor limits in every DML actions. Within one transaction, we can have only 150 DML statements. In this transaction, we have two DML statements. Number of records are processed within the transaction is 10,000. Now, now imagine a situation you want to insert 5,000 records within a couple of DML statement. Is possible? Yes, it is possible. How we are going to do the bulk DML in our classes? That is, answer is collections. For example, here I'm just inserting the only one account. If I want to insert 50 accounts, what I can do? How can I achieve with one DML statement, but the number of records is 50? Look at this example, right side example. I'm doing the DML actions, but I want to delete the n number of accounts. How I am doing it? Through my collection. I'm just mentioned here the list of accounts. The one of the collection type is list, right? So I hope in the first session you already have you already have some idea about set, list, and map. So here I'm using the list collection to query the account records and capture it. The doomed accounts are captured here through this query, and I'm going to delete it. In this example, in your organization, if .com name mentioned count as 300, 300 records will be deleted in the single time. So within one DML statement, you are deleting 300 account records. So this is how we are managing the governor limits in our DMLs by using collections. So the collection is very important when you are doing the DML operations. And I told you earlier, the upset action will be defined based on the unique identifier you are giving to the subject. You can make it as update action through Salesforce ID or the external ID. Both are applicable, and you cannot delete the you cannot do the DML without having the Salesforce ID. And you know, right? Thus, every Salesforce record is as a separate unique identifier and within a 18 digit in our database. That is a primary ID value. So whenever you are doing the DMLs, the record needs to have some ID. If you are in this query, I am already getting the accounts through my SASL query. The database returned to full accounts. So I'm deleting the accounts is easy. For example, if you are initializing the account variable like this, look at this example, initializing the account variable like this, and if you are giving the ID, then only you can do the delete action. Now, what is mean by identical elements error? Look, sometimes sometimes the code error will happen when you are copying the same kind of Salesforce subject records multiple time in the same list. Then we will receive the identical element errors. For example, I'm just queried 300 records to capture the value in the doomed accounts collection. Now I'm doing the one more query at the same time with the same filter, and I'm adding all the accounts to the same list one more time, which means I have right now I have 600 account records, 300 it's extra, it's almost a duplicate. So we will receive the identical elements error. So this is, you need to take it very carefully, because you cannot add the duplicate elements in your bulk DMLs. Okay. Now, whenever you are doing the DMLs, and obviously the validation rules and the workflow rules and the triggers will be invoked. Invoked. Why I am saying this statement? Look at this, the last line of this code. Okay, the system.debug print after DML. The code will be executed in Apex one by one. First, it will initialize the query. First, then it will capture the value in the doomed accounts, and finally it will delete it. And if you have some triggers in your system, whenever deleting accounts, that first the trigger logics will be performed. Then only you can see the system. Then only you can see the printf statement like print after DML in your debug logs. So to understand the execution pattern, I just added one more code saying that system.debug print after DML. You do not have any trigger rules. It will be printed immediately after the deletion operation. So single DML, I just explained in the previous slide. Now how we are going to do it in the bulk DML through our collection, I just explained here. Now let's talk about how we are going to handle the exception for the DMLs. I just covered the one identical elements error through my example. Bulk exception handling. So bulk exception handling can be easily done by all or none parameter. So in Salesforce, we have lot of database method. One of the method name is database.saveResult, which means if you are defining the account instance directly, like insert account list, immediately if you have the list has any duplicate elements, or if you have the validation rules that is impacted in your DML operation, immediately you will receive the DML exception and our transaction will be failure, and the next action won't be performed and it will be returned back to the calling method. Now I don't want to I don't want to receive the exception. Just I need to understand whether the record 6 success or failure, and additionally I want to do the all records at a single time. Either if I'm going to do it 300 records update at the single time, but there are a couple of records going to be failed through our validation rules or the duplicate elements, but I want everything to be inserted in my Salesforce or nothing else. So if you want to do it like that in way, you need to mention the Boolean variable as true. If you make it as true, then if all records are trying to updated within our this method, database.update method, or if you have any validation or any kind of exception happen, all 300 records will be reverted back. You cannot see any one record in your, you cannot see the any updates in your 300 records. But if you are making the value as false, then you can do the partial success, which means you can do the partial updates. For example, 150 records has proper attributes and it doesn't have any validation rule or workflow validation rule or trigger error impacts, then the 150 records will be inserted successfully and another 150 inserted records will be failed and it will be captured in the save result. So this is the difference between when you're defining directly this DML statement like update account list and the database.account list and using the all or none parameter. This is how we can manage the DML exception. And now we need to do the one more transaction control. For example, you want to insert your n number of account records in your system, and you are planning to do the multiple business logic in your system, and finally you are planning to achieve one expected value to complete the transaction. But unfortunately, the expected value is not written. Now you want to revert entire transaction. So how can we do that? The answer is save point. you can mention through in your Apex code, you can mention the save point somewhere, and you can do your logic, whatever you want to do it, like a DML or DML logic and SOCL, everything can do it. And finally, and you are doing your manipulation for to achieve some business logic, and you are not received the expected value, just initiate rollback through this method. This is also one of the database method, database.rollback. When you initialize this, when you call this database.rollback method, at the time of failure, the entire transaction will be reverted, which means whatever you have inserted in your Apex code after the save point will be reverted, which means nothing records will be inserted in your database. Let's see one quick example. Look at this example. Here I want, here the scenario is, I want to insert one partner of his account, and at the same time I need to insert one particular contact for the partner office. I'm just mentioning the save point initially before I'm doing the insertion operation for account, and finally I'm doing the insert operation. Later I'm doing the contact insertion, and I'm capturing the DML exception through our try catch value, and I'm just initiating the database rollback. If for some reason the contact has some validation rules or the record fields are missing, the contact is not inserted, and I'm receiving the DML exception, the entire transaction will be rolled back, and I cannot see the same account in my Salesforce database. And the considerations, the reference point save points cannot cross trigger invocation. For example, if you are defining some on the static variable feature. Hello, can you go to the mute if you are not speaking?
Hey, Shekhar or Purni Nixon here. If possible, can you mute all participants other than Manivasagam? I think we are getting some distractions from there. Thank you. Please go ahead, Manivasagam.
Okay. So you cannot mention the static point. You cannot mention the static point, the save point, a static variable. And if you are trying to capture the same value in the trigger, it cannot be done. The Salesforce will throw error. The static variables cannot be achieved for your save points. And when you're doing the insert of this contact record, and finally, for some reasons, it got rolled back. If you are printing the account ID, still you can see it in the system.debug logs, but it won't be cleared. How you can understood this point is, for example, if I'm printing the account ID, I can still see, even though the method is rolled back, but if I'm querying the same account ID through my SOCL, it cannot be retrieved. So that is what I mentioned here. The SFID won't be cleared on the rollback. The multiple save points, you can have the n number of save points in through our Apex classes, but you should not mention one after another. For example, if I'm defining one more save point within this method, that will be considered as invalid in our Salesforce Apex code techniques. And the DML governor limits. Here I'm doing the two DMLs. Everything will be connected to your governor limits. Okay, the two records here are processed. If you are doing the rollback, then it is also considered one more time through our into our governor limits, which means 4. Okay, let's go to the demo session. I have created one Apex class. Look at this example. I'm going to insert the partner office record, and I'm going to insert the contact record consecutively through this create partner contact method. Look at this example. I just mentioned the variable is name as public. Remember, I told you it can, the same class can be called from anywhere in the same Salesforce setup. Or and here I just mentioned the constructor method, which means it will be called whenever you are initializing the variable. Let's go to the demo. I'm giving you a few moments to see the code. The same code I'm copied here in this example also to understand the rollback. I'm inserting the demo office account, and I'm inserting the Stephen as a contact for the demo office account. And I'm look at this example. I'm doing the upsert action. Whether I'm going to do the insert or update, how the point going to be, the action going to be declared. Let's see it through the or my invocation. Okay. So here I just mentioned the create partner accounts. I'm just initialized the Apex class variable as partner class, and I'm just calling this method create partner account, and I'm passing the parameters null and true, which means I'm not sending the account office ID, and I'm making the is partner value as true. I'm executing. So this is a success example. The demo office is created successfully, and one Stephen is contact is with the name of Stephen, one contact is created successfully. Now I want to do the update. Because this last modified is 5:43 a.m. I'm giving the time. $5:44. Right now, think about the difference. I'm passing the unique identifier. My Apex classes received the account ID. So it is performing the update action right now. The contact has one of the important parameter is contact type. Without the contact type, the contact cannot be inserted in this organization. So what I'm going to do, I'm making comment in this Apex class so that this contact will be failure, and you cannot create the demo office also, the database rollback. So avoid this, I'm just deleting for the confusions. Put all example. Now there's no demo office. See, the DML exception is happened. You cannot see the demo account. I'm just giving you the idea. This is the debug logs. Here, save point value. I'm just mentioning save point. The account is done as update action, but unfortunately, unfortunately my contact doesn't. Sorry, this is a different example. Let me do it. So I'm already deleted this one. So account observation got also failed. Null. through this invocation, I'm going to insert one partner office account and Stephen one more time. Already I have deleted the previous accounts and contacts in our success example. Invoking one more time. Let's see. No. Look at the account list of account records. Still the demo accounts is not created. Why? The answer is rollback. So in this in my Apex class, the save point is introduced and the account got inserted, but unfortunately I received the error in the contact in session called record fields is missing, and it rolled back everything. Now account also not account insertion also not happened fine using my transaction controls. So now you have seen the three examples. One is upset action, now the rollback actions, and the other deletion actions. And without a delete, if it is deleted, you cannot do the same record update one more time. That's all in my topic. You can ask the questions right now if you want to do it. Sir, over to you.
Subhas will continue.
Subhas, 1 minute. There is some question. Okay.
We can do the question after the break, Mani.
Okay. Okay. The only one answer to immediately, the sharing rules can be applied to the field level. If you are defining the with sharing keyword, still field level accessibility doesn't care because I told you the sharing keyword it's connected to the record level access. The answer to the Sudhir question. Yeah, Subhas, you just go on.
Thank you, Mani, for your wonderful session. Shekhar or Nixon, if I am not audible, please let me know. Greetings, everyone who has joined from across the world. I welcome you all to my session today. I am Subhash Kumar, working as a solutions architect with SoftSquare. I have been working in Force.com platform for the last 10 years. In our previous sessions, we have presented about platform fundamentals, point and click features, Apex statements, developing classes, querying, DML, bulkification, transaction, and quite a few, maybe at least on a very high level. In this session, I'm going to present triggers and also some different asynchronous Apex types we have in Salesforce. A recorded version of this webinar will be available in a couple of days. You will receive an email with how to access the recordings. I'm afraid if you will have enough time to have a full and direct question answer session. However, please post your questions in fact, please continue posting your questions in chat so that we can answer them or take them offline, answer them, and upload like we did in the last session. While the actual plan of this session is to provide a very high level, in fact, a bird's eye view of trigger and asynchronous Apex, which is mainly aimed at developers of other platforms like .NET or Java to get to know about development in Salesforce. I will try my maximum to present some demos and code snippet. Thank you all. Let's get into the topic. So as always, it's a forward-looking statement of Salesforce. So anything can change in the future releases. So be updated. There are 3 releases per year. So please be updated. That is um, a worth statement for any Salesforce developers. So what's trigger? If you have been developers and mainly dealing with databases, you should be very much aware of what is a trigger. So in Salesforce, it's Apex code. We have already seen what is Apex. Apex code executed automatically on DML. So whenever a DML happens, if we are handling that in the trigger, that business logic will be done in the backend. So it runs in the system mode. So when I say it runs in the system mode, it doesn't care which user did the DML and whether to respect the records that are affected because of the trigger. So maybe the user who initiated the trigger by doing a DML may not have access to some records, but when the trigger gets executed, it won't consider the sharing at all, and it will start updating. However, from the trigger, we can call methods of other classes. If the classes are developed in a way to respect the sharing rules, those actions in those classes will surely respect the sharing rule. So that is one main thing about trigger. By default, trigger won't respect sharing rule. But if it calls a method and if that class handles sharing rule, then yes, it will respect the sharing rules. Why trigger? So it's mainly used to overcome the limitations of our point and click tools. But to go a step further, to manipulate DML records, I'm going with a new word, DML. So that means if I am doing a DML operation, like Mani said in the last session, an insert, update, delete, we can manipulate the records that are DML'd. Also, we can manipulate the related records. For example, if while the DML is on a vehicle, I can access the related trips or driver records or the parent office, whatever it is. So any Apex will work within the trigger. Then, like I initially said, to overcome limitations of the point and click features, mainly validation rules, because we have a point and click validation rule. We have workflow and process builder, flow, formula fields, roll-up summary fields. There are, of course, lots of limitations with all these. You might have seen, because validation rules, same object, and it can refer fields from the parents. Workflow and process builder are somewhat similar. The conditions or the criteria should be built from the same object or the parent objects. And flows, formula fields, roll-up summary fields, we can, if the relationship is master detail, that is tightly coupled, we can roll up data from the child records. But if it is a lookup relationship, we cannot find how many or calculate from the child records. A very basic example in my most favorite use case, the travel agency or the trip and vehicle. If I want to count how many future trips are there for a vehicle and store it in a field in vehicle, I cannot do a roll-up summary field. I should go with trigger. Then there are, of course, other post-DML processing, like there is something called approval process, which normally should be done by, which can be invoked manually. But if you are using a trigger, we can auto-submit for approval process. So these are some of the things for which we use trigger. Now, I said trigger mainly deals with the DMLs. Mani said about lots of DML statements: insert, update, delete, undelete, upsert, merge. So what are the DMLs supported in trigger? The basic ones: insert, update, delete, undelete. So this needs no explanation. But how does it work for the upsert or merge? Again, that's also a DML, right? How does it work? So here is the answer. Like Mani said, upsert is a combination of insert and update. If there is an insert involved, the insert trigger will fire. If there is an update involved, the update trigger will also fire. If it is only insert, it is very much similar to insert trigger. And if it is only update, it is like update trigger. So these are special DMLs. Upsert is a combination. Merge is a combination. When you are merging two records, there will be one loser and one gainer. So the gainer record will be updated with whatever data we need from the loser. So there will involve an update, and also the loser will be deleted. So those two triggers will be fired, update and delete. Then convert lead. A lead will be converted. I am not sure how much comfortable people are with this convert lead, especially those who are out of Salesforce. Update of lead. So basically when we convert a lead, the lead itself will be updated with a flag and few ID fields. An account will be inserted or updated. A contact will be inserted or updated, and an opportunity will be inserted. So all these triggers will fire. When you convert a lead, all these triggers will fire. So this is how the triggers work for special DMLs. Then, what are the type of triggers? Before trigger, after trigger. What is before? What is after? So when I take these sessions for our new joiners, I say one example. In some of the films, we may see a firing being done on the hero, and before the bullet hits the hero, we catch or the bullet is done something. Or if it hits the villain, after hitting him, it does something. It can go to out of his body, it can stay inside the body, whatever it is. So this after and before are very much similar. When the bullet goes towards the hero, before hitting him, if you are catching the bullet and doing something, that is called before trigger. Here, the hero is the database. Once we initiate a DML operation, the data is flowing towards the database. It hasn't entered the database yet. Before that, we are catching that data, manipulating it. That is before trigger. Once it hits the database, then we can do some process with the data. And that is called after trigger. Where we should use this before and after. So it takes some time to understand when to use the before and after trigger, because developers, even the Salesforce developers with a few months of experience may not be able to get a clear idea of when to use this before and after triggers. Before trigger, to manipulate the DML with data, like the bullet. The bullet is going, I can get that bullet, I can break it away, or I can redirect it to something else to hit that new target. And that is mainly with the before trigger. And validations. I said we are using the triggers to achieve validations which we cannot achieve through the validation point and click feature. That is one of the main needs, because basically these two are the very basic needs of before triggers. Manipulate the data that is DML or that is inserted or updated. After trigger, once it enters the database, then we can access the data set by the database. Because once, assume an insert, when we provided insert DML operation, it won't have an ID. Once it enters the database, a ID is generated for the newly inserted record. That can be accessed only by the after trigger if it is an insert. to manipulate other records. If you have to do some processes with the other records, the related records, and even unrelated records, we should go with the after trigger. For the same record, go with the before trigger. For the related or unrelated other records, go with the after trigger. To perform post DML actions, we may have to submit for an approval process. We may have to send some emails. All these processes, these should go with the after trigger. So hopefully this diagram will explain much better than what I explained. So if you see the first three icons, they are some of the possible scenarios of data being coming in. A user can do a DML, a system can do a DML. If you're clicking a button from somewhere, it will do some backend code and it can delete or insert or update records. That's a DML. An integration, data can come from the external systems into Salesforce. All these are basically DMLs, from wherever it comes. Insert, delete, insert, update, delete, and delete. All these are the DMLs before action. See, before entering into the database, the before trigger actions takes place. In the database, it performs system updates like the ID generation, the created date setup, the created user setup. It will set the owner. Lots of things happen once the data reaches database. And once it enters database, what can be done? That is after trigger actions. So hopefully it gives you some idea of what is before trigger and what is after trigger. I will go with some examples, don't worry. Now, trigger events. There are trigger events. Very much self-explanatory if I am correct. We basically have 4 DML operations that support trigger: insert, update, and DML, and undelete. Except for undelete, we have before and after for all the other 3 DMLs. Before insert, after insert, before update, after update, before delete, after delete. But for the undelete, there is no before even supported. So undelete basically means we are bringing some data from recycle bin back into the database. So only after the data entering into database from recycle bin, it can do some processes. Now the trigger syntax. A trigger will be attached to every objects. So if there is a trip, there can be a trigger for trip. If there is a vehicle, you can have a trigger for the vehicle. So trigger is a keyword. Trigger name is any name we give to the trigger. That basically follows the syntax of class name or method name. On S object name, on which trigger we are on which S object we are developing the trigger. Then the events. I showed you 7 events: before insert, before update, before delete, after insert. You should enter these in a comma separated list. You can have you should have a minimum 1, but you can have all the 7 as a comma separated list as shown in the example. So in this example, I have used before insert, after insert, and before delete. So if someone does an undelete, this trigger won't mind. If we do an undelete for a trip record, if we move something back from recycle bin, it won't do anything in the trigger. But before inserting and after insert, code will work. Before delete will work. Nothing related to update will happen in this particular example. So I think it's a pretty simple syntax, right? Trigger name, on, object, list of the events. Before that, let me show you how to generate a trigger. Let me go back to Salesforce and I will show. So here is the object manager. If you see, I wrote that trigger in trip, right? So look for the trip trigger, trip object, sorry. Open the trip. And for every object, you will see this section called triggers. Especially for every custom objects. There are some standard objects that doesn't support trigger. But for every custom object, you will have this option trigger. So this is one trigger I developed, this trip trigger, and you can see a button called new. It will give you the basic syntax. See, trigger, you just need to update the trigger name and the list of events. So this is how you will be going to the window where you can develop triggers. There are other ways also. There is something called developer console from which you can develop triggers, but this is the very first step for every developer. Go to the object, go to the object in the setup, go to the trigger screen and start developing the trigger. So let me continue my presentation. What is trigger bulkification? Mani was just a few moments back told about bulkification. In Salesforce, everything is bulkified. Everything should be bulkified. If it is not bulkified, it is not an Apex program for sure. Even if it is an Apex program, no one will consider it as an Apex program if it is not bulkified. So keep that in mind if you are trying to become a Salesforce developer. Try to bulkify. DML has one or many records, like Mani said, or like I can show in other examples. In an insert, you can provide a list of S objects. So that means it is not necessarily one. It can be multiple. You should handle all the records in the trigger. Now, one of the feature about trigger in Salesforce is how bigger the list is, because we can send 500 or 1000 records in a single update or insert in a single DML. But what will happen is Salesforce will split it into chunks of 200 records. So if I do 500 records in an insert, the trigger will run 3 times automatically. It will be behind the scenes. We don't have anything to do with this. So it will first split into 200, then another 200, then another 100. If it is 401 records, 200, 201. So that will be the chunks Salesforce will be splitting the records into. And these chunks are available for us through what we call trigger context variables. We will see the trigger context variables in next slides. And there are collection variables from which we can get. So a very simple definition of what is bulkifying and non-bulkified code. In a trigger, I said we have chunks of 200, so it can be one or more records. In a non-bulkified method, what we will do is loop through DML list. So loop through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to assume 10 records. Loop through the 10 records. Do queries and DMLs for each record. Then do whatever processing you want to do. That is non-bulkified. In bulkified, you are again looping through the DML list. Build collections to minimize number of queries and DMLs. You can, we have 3 sets of three collections: list, map, set. We should use these collections efficiently to build logic such that we can minimize the queries and DMLs. And this is bulkified way of coding. So I said there are chunks of 200 records. I will just show you a very simple example to see if you can understand this. So here is my trigger. Like I showed in my slide, I have a trigger in trip. I have just handled the before insert event. So before insert, it will happen. I am trying to print the trigger.size. So how many records have come in? A very basic trigger. And let me execute that code. See this? I am looping from 1 to 500, adding 500 trips to a list. In these trips, I am adding 500 records. So all of them are in the trips, and I am going to insert these trips. Okay. So you saw my code. I have one time this trigger. I'm printing trigger.size, and if you see, it has split into chunks of 200, 200, and 100. And this is how Salesforce handles it. And if for each chunk, if there are say 10 SOQLs, then when 3 chunks are executed, it will be counted as 30 SOQLs. So we should be very careful about that, because we will, as per our count, it will be just 10 SOQLs, but when this code completes execution, it would have actually consumed 30 SOQLs. So this is the process of chunking, in other words. Now the trigger context variables. I told you about trigger context variables. So these are the trigger context variables. You should use a trigger context variable with the trigger keyword, like trigger.new, trigger.newMap, trigger.old, trigger.oldMap. These are all collection variables. If you see the first column, these are all collection variables. And if you look at the right side, these are not collection variables, basically some booleans. When the code is executed, because as we have multiple events covered in a single trigger, we should be able to know if it is an insert, update, or are we going to handle for before insert. So basically, this isInsert is a boolean. If it is an insert, it will say, hey, yeah, this is an insert process. If it is an if it is an delete, it will say yes, is delete will be true, otherwise it will be false. Is before or is after. Is executing. Why this is executing is important? Because from trigger we mostly will call methods. Methods are reusable codes. So at times we may have to identify if this method is called by a trigger or a non-trigger code. In order to make that check, you can use this trigger.isExecuting keyword. Then operation type. This operation type is an enumerator that says basically before insert. This will have those 7 values: before insert, before update, before delete, after insert, after update, whatever it is. You can see that in a code. Size, the number of records being in the chunk. The right sides are very pretty straightforward. Maybe we can easily understand that right from seeing what the trigger context variable is. For non-Salesforce developers at the moment, if you are, if the audience here are non-Salesforce developers, there is a little clarification needed on this new map, old and old map. Once we understand that concept of new, these 4 collections, this trigger is revolving around these 4 collections. So I'm trying to explain it. Let's see how much this works. Anyway, I'm having a vehicle with ID 123, but it is not a Salesforce ID, sorry. For simplicity, I used 123 and 124. In reality, it will be a Salesforce ID. 123 with vehicle registration number as K6 blah blah blah. It has the value Ford and city. The model is city, make is Ford and model is city. And another vehicle with make as Acura and model as RDX. So you are sure city is a product of Honda and someone has wrongly entered it. I'm going to update this Ford from Ford to Honda. That is why I have written that striked out Ford and Honda. I'm doing an update operation basically. I change Ford to Honda and RDX to RLX. These two records are going to go in one update call. Two records in one update call. So what is new and old list? Try to see if you can understand. Old is an array of the old version of the records. 123, the registration number, Ford and city. New version will be only Honda will, the make will change. No other data will change. Similarly, in the second record, only the model changes. In first one, I changed the make. In the second one, I changed the model. I do a update with two records. Old contains the old version of the records and new contains the new version of the records. And these two lists will keep the order of the DML operation. Does that is that understandable? For example, in my example, this 123 is the first one in list and 124 is the second one in list. This old and new are automatically generated by Salesforce. They will keep that same order. So in the 0th position, it will be 123 and in the first position, it will be 124. So this is a list. I am using the same example to show what is the map, new map and old map. So if you see the first two bullets are same, it is the same thing. I am making an update and the old map will keep the ID as the key and the record itself as the value. So old map will contain two keys, 123 and 124. The vehicle record itself will be the values for each key. Pretty similar to the list, except that it is a map with the ID as the key. Confusing? Hopefully not. But when we write program, it may be a bit confusing in the initial dates, but after that it will be become very normal. So these are the two important context variables for trigger: old, new, and old map and new map. How we are going to use it? Because in our process, we may have to execute some logic only if some conditions are satisfied because of the change in value. If that particular change in value is not detected, then we need not do any logic. For example, if I want to do some logic, if the make changes, the first record, we will have to do some process for the first record, not for the second record. It's only the make changes. If we need to do some business logic for the model change, then we can ignore the first part. Let whatever change in the make, I will consider only the model. So that to make that comparison, this old map and new map and the lists are very important. I will try to show an example of this new and old maps and lists. Maybe the same example I have shown here. The one other thing you will see in the example is when we do an DML, this new and old map will have all the fields, not just the modified fields or the fields I have shown in the example. Every field in that object will be returned in the list and map. So let me change to my real code, because I to show the chunks I actually used a different trigger. So it is the same example. If you see, I am changing the make to Honda and model to RLX. I believe you can see this. And in the second one, yeah, for the first record, I changed the make, and for the second record, I changed the model. This is the actual ID. This is now different from what I showed in the slide. Before that, let's take a look at the vehicles which are there. So if you see, to easily understand, I have just use the make and model only in two records. One is Ford City and the other one is Acura RDX. I'm going to change Ford to Honda and RDX to RLX. These are my debug logs. This is the old list and this is the new list. This is the old map and this is the new map. I'm first talking about this old lists, old and new. If you see, every data will be same, false, false, the vehicle number is same, the date is same, the created by is same, last modified same, everything except that field will be same. But when it comes to the make, the old list contains Ford itself and the new list contains the new value, the Honda. And I am moving on. For the model, the old version contains RDX and the new version contains RLX. So if you see, this is basically a list. See, there is no map notation. This is a list of vehicles. Same thing with the map. If you see, this is a map. See here. This one is the key. The before equal to symbol is the key, and it says, hey, this map contains this key and that particular vehicle itself is the value. Same thing here. So this is how, this is a debug log notation. And here also you can see that nothing else will change. Car, total seats 5, miles covered 350, everything is there. But only the model will change from RDX to RLX. Same way in the other map, for the other record, it will be this. You see, change of Ford to Honda. So these are the things you need to be aware of, these new and old things. And let me see if we can go for a break. But before that, so we saw this and where these context variables are used. So let's cover that too. Not all context variables are available in all the events. There are specific reasons for that. Before insert, we have only the new list. We neither have new map, no old or old map, because Insert basically is a set of new records. There is nothing old. And in the before, we don't have new map. We only have new list. Why? Answer is pretty simple, because before happens the data before entering the database. At that time, these inserted records won't have an ID. To build a map, we need the ID. So it will have only the new list. After insert, nothing old, but once it enters the database, it will have an ID. So it will also generate a map with the ID. All variables, all these collections are available only for update, because before update we'll have a old version and new version, and after update we'll also have the new version and the old version. Before delete, when we delete, there is nothing new. We are only deleting the existing records. So we will have the old details, the old list and the old map. Undelete. So undelete, basically what undelete is, the record will be still in Salesforce, only with the flag is deleted will be marked as true. But still, it is a matter of unchecking that checkbox in the backend. We cannot do that directly. When we undelete something from the recycle bin, that is what happens. Still, it is something coming from outside into Salesforce. Though it is in the Salesforce recycle bin, doesn't exist in the database. So it will be considered as something coming out into Salesforce system. So that is why it will be considered as new. So we can have the new and new map only in the undelete. And see my last note, new in before events are writable, not in the after events. I said about manipulating, right? That bullet that comes to the hero is processed. That means we are doing some operations on the data that is coming in. They are available in the new version, not and in the before version. So those data that are coming in are manipulatable or writable. All other data, even new in old list or old map, is not writable. Only in the before it is writable. I will show how to deal with that. Now maybe I think it's time to take a break, because I have been lecturing for too much time, and also Mani was doing some took some long time. Anyway, it's time to go for a break, Shekhar.
Yes, Subhas. Will it be 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's give 5 minutes.
Okay, sure. Okay. Subhash?
Yes, Sagar.
Yeah, you can start now.
Okay. Was this break enough?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, folks. Thank you for showing that patience till now, and let's try to continue with this. Hopefully, you had a little break, enjoyed the break. So, what are the best practices for trigger? There are lots of best practices, but I'm trying to summarize very few things. Bulkify, which we already have seen. No business logic inside triggers. We should keep the triggers very light. We should write the logics in a handler method. That has mainly one advantage, the data security, and the second one is cluttering of triggers will end up with lots of issues. We should methodize everything. We should write methods for everything. And also we should make sure these methods are not redundant or are calling or doing multiple SOQLs or DMLs. So that's a combination of best practices we should practice. So the second one comes, the third one, business logic in handler methods. So don't write business logic in triggers at all. Use the trigger just to call the methods. That's it. Single trigger per object. As a developer, I used to create multiple triggers in an object in my initial days. And I have also faced the consequences. The main problem with the multiple triggers is triggers don't have an order of execution, because we may think the first trigger in the list we see will be the first trigger, but that's not the case. No one has an answer for which trigger will be triggered first. So keep one trigger per object and use your efficient code to check what are the events you are going to handle and call the handler methods. So never ever go to multiple triggers per object. In the very worst scenario, if you really want to do, don't do that, but still one trigger per event is acceptable, because that won't mind about the order of execution. But better go with single trigger per object. So these are some of the examples, very basic examples. So how we can use for validations. I'm inserting a inserting a trip, and if the trip has a vehicle already set, and if the vehicle has another trip on the same date, we should not allow that trip to be created. That is a basic validation. So the vehicle should not get into any conflict of two dates. Another one is updating a trip. Same thing. You are changing the vehicle assigned for a trip, but what if the vehicle has already a trip on that same date? Again, we should not allow that to be saved. Then deleting a trip. I'm trying to delete a trip. Unfortunately, if a future trip is planned, then we should prevent accidental deletion of the trip records. So if it is a future trip, don't allow it to be deleted. So these are some of the basic validations we can use. I'm mainly going with the vehicle updates, because this scenario can be extended. When you set a driver for the vehicle, driver for the trip, you can do the same sets of validations. Also, when a vehicle is changed, you should be careful for the old vehicle and new vehicle. There are lots of scenarios coming up. So I'm trying to go with just some very simple use cases. And this is a trigger structure I have developed for these scenarios I explained. If you see, this is a very skeleton, no business logic here. I have 1, 2, 3, 3 events here. I said about that operation type context variable. If trigger.operation type is before insert, do trigger handler dot validate trip. Here trigger handler is the handler class for the trigger and validate trip is the trip. Trigger.new is the parameter. This is a list. Trigger.new is a list of trips. Same thing before update. I am passing 2 parameters, trigger.new and trigger.old map. This is because we need to compare new values and old values. You may ask why not trigger.new and trigger.old? You can use, but best approach is to go with trigger.old map. So for new, use the trigger.new list, and for the old, use trigger.old map. I will show why. Then delete. It is going to be the old list, the data we are going to delete. And here is the method to validate. Okay. So I am inserting some trips. I want to check if the vehicle has another trip assigned. If so, we should throw an error. We should show a validation error. For trip, see in the method, this is a list of trip. I am passing in trigger.new when I call. So that is basically a list of trip. I am looping through the trips. I find the vehicle. If the vehicle is null, I don't need to worry. If the vehicle is set up, I should query for the date. I should get the trip date, and I should query any other trips that has this same vehicle and same date. If I find one, show an error. Quite simple, right? Loop through, find the vehicle. If there exists one, just show an error. So this is the logic. God, what happened? How dare you are? Someone is scolding me. Maybe those Salesforce developers in this audience group, I guess. How dare you are? What is wrong with this code? I don't know. Hopefully someone might have understood. Though this code is wrong, though this code is correct logically, it has an anti-pattern. That is why someone is yelling at me. Here is the anti-pattern. There is a loop. There is a query inside the loop. That should be avoided for any reason. If Salesforce has a holy book, it is one of the sins to have SOQLs or SOSLs or DMLs within a loop. So this code, though is right, is wrong. So how to write? I don't know how much I can explain this in detail, but this is the way to write it. I will just read through the comments. Prepare a list of vehicles. You see my pointer? Prepare a list of vehicles. Build a map of vehicles and all their future dates. Build a map of vehicle and all their future dates. And after that map is built, it will be something like this. These two are vehicle IDs. For this vehicle, I have this many future dates. One on 29th, one on June 2nd, and one on June 15th. And for the second vehicle, I have one trip on 5/29. Then again loop through that original list. Check if this date has a conflict. Then show an error. Don't care if this trip doesn't have a vehicle. find all the future dates for that vehicle. Is the trip's date found in that map? Show an error. How? 20 or so lines for 7 lines, right? What are we achieving? Less hit to database, more faster, though number of lines are higher, it's more faster. We are escaping governor limits. We will cover governor limits in detail, but we are escaping governor limits here. So basically, this is how we will be writing the code. Let me show an example quickly. We are running out of time for sure. Anyway, I will try to demo one example with this. So this is my trigger. I am calling that non-bulkified method. See, this one is the non-bulkified method. If you see, I am highlighting this. I mentioned it as non-bulkified. I am going to insert some records, see how it works. I am adding 50 trips. And I am doing a insert, database.insert. Let me run this code. It works. I am changing it to 100. I'm inserting 100 records. It works. I'm changing it to 101. Let's see what happens. Too many SOQL queries exception. So it has reached that 100 queries with the non-bulkified method for which someone alerted me. Let me change that to the bulkified method now. So this is a bulkified method, which I showed the second snippet. I'm executing that same method, same code. I'm inserting 101 records, no issues. So hopefully now you understood how it works, right? So it will say at the very end, I actually created some records with conflict. So it says, if you see each line, it says not inserted, not inserted, not inserted, not inserted. That means all the records are failing because of wrong date. Let me try to do one more example with this. I'm adding one trip which has a very future date 5:30, and I am limiting this number just to 2. See, 2 not inserted, 1 successfully inserted. So 2 records are inserted and 2 have failed and 1 is a success. Hopefully that tells you how it worked. Now let me show one more example. This is for validation. Now I am going to show you something for a field update. So these are the trips I have. I don't have any newly inserted vehicles. What I have done is I didn't set any vehicles for a trip. I will show you the code. Hopefully that will be easy to understand. I'm inserting vehicles. The condition is if there are trips happening in the next 2 days, a vehicle will be assigned. If the trips are going to happen in another 4 or 5 days, a vehicle will not be assigned, and that will be done as another process. So for that, what I'm doing is I selected a customer, in fact, 2 or 3 customers whose name starts with a new trip, just for easy understanding. And I am creating some trips. One is the trips are on 6/1/14. That is June 1st. So when these trips are inserted, no vehicle will be assigned. Let me make sure I have that code uncommented. This is one method. I will be calling that from the trigger. So this is the trigger I am calling it, and my handler will have this method. Oh gosh. See, this vehicle column is blank because the trip date is on June 1st. And I'm going to create few for tomorrow, that is 5/24. As this trip is going to happen the very next day, it should assign vehicles if they are available. These are the 3 trips created for tomorrow, and you can see the vehicles being assigned. So this is an example of manipulating data, because when we inserted, if you looked at the code, there is no vehicle set, only customer type, status, pickup address, and pickup time. I didn't make any vehicle assignment. It automatically did in the backend. So this is the before trigger and before field update. And I want to show one more thing, that is that trigger.old thing, because that is pretty important. So that method is after update distance. So this update distance. So what I'm doing is, if I change the status of the trip to completed, maybe a very fictitious example. Once I change the trip to completed, the trip is completed, it will update the distance covered based on Google API. At the moment, I don't have a Google API, but I'm using some dummy values for that. So see these lines, this is what I wanted to bring to your notice. I am looping through the trips. I want to check if status has changed. So what I should do is, this T contains the new trip, and I, using the ID of that trip, I get the old version of the trip, because I am passing it as a parameter. I am getting the old version of that trip. So if the new version's status is completed and old one status is not completed, that means the status has changed from some other status to completed status. At that time, I need to get the distance updated. For that, I am finding the trip IDs, and I am passing the trip IDs to a method, Unfortunately, I don't have time to show all those things. That will update the distance. So let me quickly show you that example too. So these are the trips I am going to show you, because if you see this estimated distance, that is the field I am going to update. At the moment, this status is scheduled. These are the ones in my example. Let me run through that. So I'm querying trip 1, trip 4, and trip 5. Basically, yeah, trip 1, trip 4, and trip 5. And I'm changing the status to completed. Let me execute this code. Before that, let me make sure. That's it. So I didn't change any estimate the distance. I just changed the status and did a calculation. So that's all about triggers I have. Let me check if I have anything for you. That's it. That's it from trigger. So there are lots of items in trigger that we can do lots of things. We should be doing that very carefully. So with that, let me finish the trigger topic. Let us move into asynchronous effects. Though we are not announcing an official break, let me announce a short break of some 1 minute. Sorry. Thank you all. Hopefully that break helped. We are moving into another topic, from trigger to asynchronous apex. So what is asynchronous apex? It runs as a separate thread. It won't combine with the main thread, because our transactions, when we start a transaction, example at DML, it will do lots of things behind. And this asynchronous apex runs as a separate thread. It executes in the background, and while the asynchronous jobs are executing, users need not wait for it. It will just do in the backend and finish the job. Only thing is, it will make the troubleshooting a bit tricky, because as it is happening in the backend, we should have some super debug logs to make sure it works. So why asynchronous apex? Resource scalability. Assume we are going to do a very complex logic somewhere, but that doesn't need to be happening immediately. Right away, when the user does a DML, if you want to do something very complex, we can push it to an asynchronous job, and that will do in the backend. So that will, of course, give us some resource scalability, so that it will release resource pretty easily. Then higher governor limits. As it is a background job, Salesforce allows higher governor limits for this asynchronous apex. We can overcome some platform limitations. For example, one of the very well-known platform limitation is we cannot call an external service or a web service call from a trigger, in that cases we will go for this asynchronous apex. Then at times we may need to do some specific actions as a specific user. So every user should not be allowed to do that. So in that job, in that time, we can run a background job in that specific user's context. Avoids lag for increased user efficiency. So when there are lots of background items, lots of synchronized items happening that are not necessarily to be completed immediately, the user will have to have a lagging time and he will have to wait. So at that time, we can push those. Identifying those tasks is a big, that's a big skill. We should push those to asynchronous Apex. What are the asynchronous flavors we have in Apex? Future method, batch Apex, scheduled Apex, and queuable Apex. These are the main 4 asynchronous flavors. Future methods, it runs in its own thread. Though we are calling a future method, it won't run immediately. It will wait for the resource to be availed. Then it will work. Common use case for most of these web service, most of these asynchronous jobs, these callouts is the main one of the common use. And there is a limit from a transaction. We can call maximum of 50 future invocations. If we go to 51, then it will throw an error. Next is future syntax. This future method is very similar to a normal method, except that it will have a future annotation. When we call this method, if it has a future annotation, it will start running as a separate thread. It must be static. It cannot return anything, any value, because it runs in the backend and ends there. It vanishes. Arguments are very much restricted. Only the primitive data types can be used for future or collections of primitive data types. So S objects not allowed. Needs explicit mention to allow callouts. We should say if a future method should allow callout or not. So we should specify that. If you look at this example, this is very much, you can write these methods in any classes you want. But the thing is, it should be a static one. So this is the future annotation at future callout equal to true. That is why I said we should specifically mention if this callout equal to true is not mentioned. If you try to do a web service callout, it will throw an error. And this get distance from Google. This is a method that calls Google API, which accepts 2 addresses and finds the distance. So this is future method. So basically, the main use of this feature is to call callouts from triggers. At times, some DML operations will require some callouts to be made. At that time, we can call this method, and it will do that callout once the trigger completes. The next flavor is batch Apex. This is to process large data sets in chunks. It allows 50 million records to be processed. It won't process the 50 million records at a time. It will query those 50 million records, and we can define the chunks. It can be processed as 50 million separate transactions or in batches of 200 records, anything between 1 and 200. So the maximum batch size is 200. You can set any number from 1 to 200, and it will process as those number of chunks. This one is mainly, batch Apex is mainly used for data reconciling, cleansing, and archiving. So at the end of the day, when every users are sleeping, we may need to do some data cleansing or reconciling. And at that time, this batch Apex will be very useful. Again, callouts to web service. Then the batch Apex syntax, this implements this database.batchable interface, stateful and stateless. I said it runs in chunks. So can we have something in common to work between all these chunks? All these chunks are processed as different threads. So one after one after one after, it will be processed as different chunks. if we have to combine the results from each batch, it should be stateful. Otherwise, it can be stateless. And finally, after all batches are done, we can call this finish method. To maybe after finishing, we may have to email the results to some user. At that time, it's a one-time action. So use the finish method. Start is a one-time action. Finish is a one-time action. Execute will process through the chunks of records. So start collects objects or records, execute and finish. Batch Apex syntax. Default batch size is 200. Accept batch sizes between 1 and 200. If we do not mention anything, it will be 200. So it can process up to 50 million records. In the start method, we can finish up to 50 million records. Then we can have query locator or IEEE objects. What is this query locator and IEEE? Query locator is basically a result of a SOQL. If you do a query, that is a query locator. What is IEEE object? Assume you need to process a very large CSV file and create records. We can process the XMLs, we can process CSV files. So they can be very bigger ones. So if we are pulling them into normal synchronous methods, that can go into heap size errors. So at that time, we will be using these IEEE objects. Basically, these are we will convert a big blob or something into a list of records. Then again, we will process them as batches. This method is called this batch apex is invoked through this database.execute batch method. So that is the syntax, the last point. That is the way to invoke a batch apex. Given time permits, I will show you that also. So this is a batch code. You see, this has a start method. So this one is the start method. So it is a query locator, and we query something. That's it. That query results. Assume this query has 100 records. And if the batch size is 1, this execute block will be executed 100 times. If the batch size is 2, this block will be executed 50 times. Like that. If the batch size is 4, it will be 25 records. If the batch size is 200, this execute batch will be run only once because only 100 records are there. And the queried results will be in the second parameter of the execute method. So this will again be a list of the queried object. Process and finally finish. Send a summary email. That is what the batch code does. Then queuable apex. What is this queuable apex? It is an advanced version of future method. Future method, we cannot chain future methods, but queuable methods can be chained. At the end of the queuable method, we can call another queuable method. That is not possible with the future method. So from the time being, it's better. I would say it is better to go with queuable apex than the future, but it depends on the need again. Then allows complex data types. That is another thing. Future doesn't allow complex data types. Queuable allows complex data types. Again, web service call out. This one implements the queuable interface. This is just syntactical. This returns a job ID for tracking. We can say see if it worked or failed. We can use an interface to see the status. This is invoked with system.enqueue-job. Consider it as, like I said, it is an advanced version of future which can be chained. So this one is an example. I am passing a set of IDs to this queue. In the execute method, I am processing those IDs. For example, there are limits of web service callouts. Assume we are expecting 200 callouts to be made. Then we should go for this queuable method where we should process the first 100 callouts, remove those IDs, and pass the remaining 100 IDs. This, what I am showing, this will initially have 200 trip IDs. Once I process, I will be removing some of the trip IDs which are processed, and I will have a new set of ID. I will pass it on again to this same queue. The next time it comes, this will be 100. It will process, then this will become, this removal will make it 0. As it is empty, it will not call the queue. So easily we can do those 200 callouts using this chained queue. Then this comparison matrix, good for large number of records, 50 million, maximum 5 concurrent jobs for batch, good error handling needed, future quick asynchronous processing, small number of records, faster than batch, easy to implement, primitive types, because it is just like a method. Hard to monitor, that is the biggest trouble with the future. Then it cannot call other asynchronous jobs like batch or queuable. Queuable is quick asynchronous processing, supports S-object, sorry for that spelling mistake there. Faster than batches, can chain jobs. That is the biggest advantage of queuable jobs, that it can chain jobs. It can be monitored. So next is a scheduled Apex. You might have heard of this word schedulable. To perform periodic tasks. Assume you need to do something at the midnight when all users are sleeping. You go for a scheduled job. It can invoke batch jobs to, if you want to do data cleansing at midnight 12 every day, at 12 midnight, invoke a batch process that will handle bulk process. It is configurable. There are configurable and programmatic scheduling to overcome limitations of flow scheduler. So basically, do you want to do something at a particular time every day on a every day or week or month or year? Because there are some cases I want to do this happen on every the 1st of June and January, sorry, 1st of July and January every year. So I will schedule a job for that runs on July 1st and January 1st. So here is the syntax. It implements the schedulable interface invoked with the cron expression. You might have, many of you might have from other platforms also may be using this cron expression. So the cron expression mainly contains these seconds, minutes, hours, day of month, month of day, optional. There are lots of documentations available for sure. So the system.schedule will have a scheduled job name for us to monitor a cron expression. For example, this cron expression will run at this is second, 0th second, 15th minute, 4. So 4:15 basically on 23rd May. So that time is already passed, right? So this should have been processed. Then we will be calling the class name, new instance of the class name. That will schedule the job, and it will, at the moment, this scheduler will run only one time because we are specific about the date and time. To recur events, we should use star, question marks. So this cron expression itself is a big topic. You can easily find them. So this is the scheduler example. I am executing the batch, trip management batch. I am invoking a batch job from the scheduler. And that is it regarding the asynchronous job. I'm sure I went a bit fast. Anyway, I want to show one example regarding the batch process. Let me see how easy it is going to be. So if I call this from a scheduler, a bad job will be executed. One second. Let me check if I already set up those. So these trips, these are going to happen on 26th, that is 3 days from today. My code actually finds any trips that are going to start 3 days from today and finds a vehicle and assigns it to those trips. You may be aware of these things, right? A trip will be created, the vehicle and driver will be assigned only at the very end last moment. So that is what I'm going to execute. So see this. So my class name is trip management batch. I'm executing it now with the batch size of 3. This one is the batch size. So I have executed this. If you see, it has set the driver and vehicle. It will the logic behind will find the drivers and vehicles which are not assigned for that day for any of the trips, and it will set the vehicle. So I want to. So this is the trip management batch. Because for 3 records, this batch class is not needed. But when it comes to when the number becomes larger, only then we will use this batch classes. So do not go for this batch for very less number of records. So if I start explaining this, this will take some time. This is the query. I am querying records for the next for coming up in the 3 days. Then I am finding the vehicles and drivers available on those dates and assigning it to the trip, and that's it. And finish in the finish, I am not doing anything. That's all I am doing. So again, like I said in the very first moment, it's a high level. I try to be on a very high level, but wanted to show some of the examples. Hope and believe I didn't make you feel bored. Thank you so much for listening to my session. As again, you will get the recorded sessions. Try to promote the sessions if you really like them. Thank you so much. Back to you, Shekhar.
Thank you, Subhas, for the wonderful session. Nixon and Yashwant will continue the final part of today's session.
Yeah. Hi, Subhash. Can you stop your share?
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
That.
Thanks, Subhash. I hope you guys see my screen. Okay. So before start, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, based on your time zone, please. And about myself, this is Ashwant. I'm working in software from past 3.8 years. And today we're going to dive and see about like how to develop an unit test in Apex class. So as you guys see all this in all places where we are demoing Salesforce. So this is like a forward-looking statement. Whenever we may discuss or we may bring few items which are already in beta. So make sure whenever you're making any purchase decisions, make sure it's globally available and you can check that in Salesforce too. And before I start, I would like to thank Salesforce Ohana, and which is like which give us and which teachers or which give an experience to how to learn and how to teach. And now we are following the same. What is the Salesforce one main principle to giving back to the Ohana, and like to welcome all you guys to the Salesforce Ohana. So let's start with our today's topic. And what are unit tests? Basically, so as long as you guys know, like testing is the main important concept for software development lifecycle. And if you know, like you might have heard about QA team and development team. So usually in each and every corporation or organization, QA team, there will be a set of team which will do all the QA to make sure all the code whatever you written is working fine or not. So why we need to do it testing from the developer end? So if you ask me, so you let's take a simple example. So you have a validation rule, and usually you guys know, we all know how developer do a testing. So we might we didn't cover all the scenarios while we are developing or while we are testing. So what we'll do is we'll just push to the UAT and we'll give to the and we assign back to the QA team. So QA will test while QA is doing a regression testing. They used to find these all these minor bugs, and so they will again report back. So to avoid all these kind of things, what we usually used to do is we'll develop a unit test. So which we technical which in terms we can say a test we can which is run by a developer. So let's see why unit tests. So why we need to use unit tests? So in the Salesforce, if you ask me, like let's see what are the why we need to use unit tests. So to validate desired behavior, so let's say whatever you develop, you want to make sure all the code you have written is working fine or not, despite of how much data, like Subhash told, like bulkifying all the stuff. So you have, as a developer, you have to make sure and reduce the bug cost. As I said, like we might miss some of the scenarios while we are while developer doing testing from our end. So to make sure all our minor changes, and it will not to cost many of to not to cost much time, and not to wait for the development or deployment. So we don't need to do that, so we can deal with the unit test and perform bulk testing. So as you, if you guys like as Subhash mentioned, the bulk testing is the one scenario or one example or one use case we can take for unit test. You can do bulk testing, so you can't load like a 200 records or 300 records as a from user end from user end. So that's why we usually used to do a bulk testing from the unit tests. And finally, last but not least, while you are deploying your code, whatever you have written, we usually used to develop in either sandbox or in the developer environment. So if you want to deploy, or you want to, while you're dealing with application development, each and every Apex class, whatever you have written, should have a 75% of code coverage, so that it will Salesforce will allow only to you deploy to the uh, production, or to release another application. And what to test. So you have written Apex class, like Manivasagam told about what is Apex class, and Subhash told about what is Apex trigger. So yes, like they mentioned, you have to, whatever they mentioned, you have to develop unit tests for all the triggers and the classes, and don't bother about these three web service Apex tests. So for now, in the next session, maybe one of our colleague will cover, and custom UI controllers, this will be a part of the next agenda, next session. And Apex batch, queuable scheduler, whatever Subhash so far covered. So we have to write unit tests for all this. So let's dive. So what is syntax of test class? So what are the way we are developing unit tests? We used to call this test class in the Salesforce. So if you see the syntax, so it should start with the east test is the annotation we used to define or identify that is a test class. And this is the simple example or simple syntax that Manivasagam explained or went through how to define a class. And this is a simple example of developing a particular method. And let's see how to write an effective test class. So while you're developing as a developer, you have to consider few things before you're developing unit test. So let's see, each and every Apex class, whatever you're written, whatever you're going to write, should mention with an annotation called attest, a class, and each a method. Let's see quickly a live example. So for now, for demo purpose, I just created a skeleton for here. So far Subhash covered a trip trigger. So he developed a few methods. So I want to develop a test class for the trigger what he covered. And let's see how we can test from the unit test itself. So I just created a skeleton here. So as I said, as I told you in the syntax, a class should start with the at is test, and And this is also another best practice we would say. And a test class name should contain the class name underscore test. And the method, whatever the method you're going to invoke, it should also start with it is test and should be a static and void. And this is the method name. So let's see what we have. Test class should only run with test data, not actual data. So whatever unit test you're doing, it should only check with the test data. So how can we create test data from the test class itself? Let's see that. So for now, I have written few code here. So if you see here, I'm just covering one method which Subhash is assigning a vehicle. So if you see, I'm just inserting a vehicle record here and inserting a contact record here, which is a driver. So this is how you insert your record. Don't bother about whether it will impact or whether it will reflect in your Salesforce data. Salesforce will not create any records in the live. So it will only, the records which are creating here will only still resides in this particular context. Whenever this context is done, it will get deleted. So you don't need to bother about the data size or the volume of data, how much you're creating. So if you see here, I'm just creating another trip record. I'm just inserting a trip record. Let's just run this, save this test class. I'm saving here. So now let's see how this test, I'm just inserting a trip record. So far Subhash covered how trigger is firing from, how a handler is invoking from the trip trigger. So I'm just inserting a trip record here. So if you want to run this test class in the setup in quick find, you just enter apex test execution, and that will give you the screen like this. If you enter here, you will find here apex test execution, and here click on select tests, and you will see here whatever the test class which you annotated with it is test will be listed out over here. So let's select on this. So I started running my, and its test class is started running and it's passed. So now I want to see how much of code which I have written is so far passed. So if you see the gear icon here, let's click on this. And if you're able to see the developer console, just click on this. It will navigate back to the screen which is having developer console. And here, if you see a tests, there is a tab called tests. Here, let's scroll to the trigger, whatever Subhash have developed, which is trip trigger. And you see, I inserted a record in my test class, and here it fired it fired the before insert record event here, and it fired the whatever the method Subhash have so far developed. And let's see what are the lines of code have covered in this trip trigger handler. So this is a trip trigger handler. And so far in my test class, I just covered the method which is assigning a vehicle. So let's open the particular method. So I don't want to bother about these all methods. So if you see, this is the method which I'm assigning a vehicle. So if you see here, this is the method which Subhash have written. So he's iterating through all the number of trips which are coming, and he's assigning a vehicle record to the respective vehicle based on the driver availability. So if you can easily find and figure it out what are the number of lines it has been so far covered from the code which you have written in your test class. And so use test.start test and test.stop test into each method. So let's see what it will do. So I don't want to go a demo for each and every, I'm just showing in my notepad. So if you see here, this is where I'm inserting a record, right? So here, if you do see, I use a test.start test and test.stop test here, which will give us to have a separate set of governor limits whenever these methods is getting executed. So in this insert context, a trigger is firing. So I want to have a own set of governor limits. You have to use the test.start test, and you have to write all your code underneath these two. And use system.asset and asset equals and not asset not equals. What does it mean? So you have written all your code, and you do see all the code as passed successfully from the developer console. And how can you make sure whatever you have written is working fine or not? So here Subhash is assigning a vehicle which is already available, which is not having, which is not yet assigned. He is assigning a vehicle to the newly created trip. So we want to make sure this is working fine or not from our test class itself. So let me go back to my notepad. Yeah, sorry. Here, if you see two lines I just commented out, and here this trigger is assigning a particular vehicle. If you see, I created a one vehicle here, and I created driver record here, and I just created a trip record without a vehicle. I didn't assign any vehicle to this trip record, so that a a trip is created without any vehicle. So what Subhash method will do here is, whenever you're inserting a record, Subhash method will assign vehicle which is already free and which don't have any trips yet. So that's here what I'm doing is, this method, after this method was completely executed, I want to check whether this vehicle or this trip is assigned to this vehicle or not. So if you do see here, I'm just doing a circle with the trip ID here. So this is the trip. Subhash is assigning a vehicle here in his method. So I'm querying a vehicle field from the trip record with the trip ID, whatever I have inserted. So now I'm using system.assert equals, which accepts two parameters. What is the expected value and what is the outcome? So whenever a trip was inserted successfully without vehicle, he's assigning a vehicle record for the trip, and I'm checking the vehicle instance record.id is equal to the vehicle which Subhash assigned. So if doesn't match, it will throw us an exception that the asset is failed because of so and so reason. So you can play with system.assert equals and assert not equals based on your respective criteria, and develop cases for all the scenarios whatever you have been. Let's say you in Subhash context, you have like a kind of multiple if and else, and you have to develop and you have to cover all the scenarios whatever you have written. And last but not least, so far Subhash and Manivasagam was talking clearly about bulkifying. How an end user do, or how a developer can test using bulk records. So for that, let me go back to my notepad. Um, yeah. So if you do see in this method, I'm just iterating through a 200 records, and I'm inserting a trip records in a, I'm just iterating through all the list and collecting all the my trips in a particular variable, and I'm inserting here. So again, Subhash method will fire and it will assign a trip record, a vehicle record to the trip which has created without a vehicle. So I'm just doing another system.assert equals. So this is the way, or this is how one of the way you can do a bulk test in a test class, and which will not impact any of your original data. So you don't need to bother about whether it will add to your Salesforce organization data. So you can create a number of records so that you can make sure it will even support with the bulk testing. And yeah, so another important one here, well, whenever you're doing test class, so far you have written, I have covered only for assigning a vehicle, which is a trip is created without a vehicle. So what if so much written, so like a kind of 10 to 15 methods. So I have to cover all these methods. So in each and every method, what I need to do is I need to create a vehicle record. I need to create a contact record. I need to create a trip record. So I'm completely using this, creating the same record in the different methods. So I don't want to do that. So can we have a separate kind of I want to insert all my records at only once, and I can use those records whichever I created in my respective methods. Yes, we do have, that is something called test setup. So what is test setup will do? And test setup is a method which will act as like a kind of a storage of all your data in a test class context, and it will increase the performance of your test class. And test setup method will execute before your test method will executes. and each and every test class should have only one setup method. And if you have any errors in the setup method itself, entire your execution will fail. So if you do see my picture right hand side, this is my, let's consider this is my test class, and I'm have only one setup method for my entire test class, and I'm leveraging the same test class, whatever the data I inserted in this my setup method in my respective methods. Let's see how can we write this in my test class. So here, this is the setup developing of setup method syntax, and you have to annotate with a test setup. And here I'm inserting, what I need to do is, let's consider the same assign vehicle scenario. What I need to do is, I just need to create a vehicle record, and I just need to create a driver record. So the same two records, if I want to develop this entire method for entire scenarios for the entire Subhash whatever I have written, so I need to develop like a kind of 4 or 5 methods. So I have to do the same DML for number of times. So it will increase it will reduce the performance of the test class. So to avoid that, I just created 2 records in the setup method, and I'm querying the same contact record here. Let's say I inserted a contact with a John David, and I can able to query the same record in my assign vehicle method, so that I can access whatever the contact I inserted here in here. So I can assign the same driver ID, and I can do all my operation, and Subhash method will execute and will assign the respective vehicle to my trip, which is not created with any vehicle. So let's consider the same scenario. Let's consider I'm developing the same method again. So I'm covering for another scenario which Subhash written. So let's see here. I just updated some in this context. What happened is, this vehicle got assigned to this trip, right? So if I want to, is that can I able to access the same vehicle here? Yes, you can access. So what happened is, this vehicle is assigned to this trip. If you do query the same vehicle in the second method, whatever you have inserted here will only be reflected here. So whatever the methods, let's consider this. You assigned a vehicle here. So this vehicle should have a trip, right? So when I'm querying the same vehicle here, it should not have the trip, because setup method, the data, whatever you are inserting, and if any manipulation has happened in the setup method, will not reflect to the setup data. So you don't need to bother about whether the data, whatever you have inserting, will gets manipulated in your methods. So you're good to go and insert whatever the data you want in the setup method. And last one in the, how can you leverage it? How can you write effective test class using test data factory? So what does it mean, test data factory? Or you can simply call test util. So what it will do? So in previous my example, here I'm inserting vehicle record and I'm inserting driver record. So the contact insertion, let's consider you have built like a kind of 2 to 3 triggers, and you want to insert the same contact and for multiple times. Do you want to do the same like same kind of insertion in all the places, or how can we make it more efficient? So that's where we do have a I just created a test data factory here. So this is the class I just created for our demo purpose. What does it will do? It will just prepare an instance of the let's consider this method construct vehicle instance. What this method will do, it's accepting 3 parameters, which is a vehicle name, and which is number of seats and vehicle type. So this method will prepare the vehicle instance, and it will return to my test class. So let's see how we can develop the same in our test class. So I'm just copying this. So it's saved. So let's go to the Apex test execution again. So it's in queue, and whenever it gets executed, you will see the result here. And if at all any exception comes into the test class and you want to debug, you can click on this detail link view here, And if you click on this, that will give you, if at all any exception or any success message, that will show a proper message in the respective link. And for now, let's see what this test class is does. And now I have again modified my test class. I want to make sure how many number of lines has covered. So if you see, there is a button called code coverage. So let's click on this. So sometimes you will see like a developer console will not work. Just do close this and open the same again. That will show you what are the number of lines I have covered. So while we are going over the lines which are covered, what if you see the red lines which are highlighted with the red color, which are not covered. I didn't develop anything logic regarding this. So these are not covered. So we can identify easily. A developer can easily identify what are covered and what are not covered. So let me go to my method. So I'm covering for this. My method will also, whatever I have written is also do the same. So let's see another method here. So here Subhash is finding the availability of vehicle in the next upcoming 2 days. So if you do see here, so our code is covered up to here and it's executed up to here, and our socle didn't find any record and it doesn't return any records. So that's why it didn't went into the for loop iteration. So this way you can easily identify how many number of lines are covered and what is your code coverage. So as I mentioned earlier, each and every Apex class or trigger, whatever you're developing, it should have a 75%. And we would say like better to maintain like a maximum of 100%, so that you don't want to bother about if at all any admin can add a validation rule and it will break entire your test class. And let's see what I written here. So this is the class which I written using the test data factory. So as I mentioned earlier, the setup method is used to create all my setup data, which I'm going to use in my entire test class. And my test data factory will construct a vehicle instance or whatever the subject instance you're going to pass, and that will return here. And do not do any DML in the test data factory, as we use this is like we used to follow as a best practice. Just construct or prepare an instance in the test data factory and return to your test class, and test class will do a DML for us. And you can simply add whatever the changes you want, and you can enhance if at all you want to add any additional fields over here. And the same thing here, I just use it the same for constructing a trip as well. So this makes our developer job easy, and you don't need to do the same code for each and every time. And we can simply go over the test data factory and we can call this, and this will reduce a lot of time for a developer. And so like this picture I think gives a brief idea. So the test data factory is the one class which we can use and which we can leverage in n number of classes. So we can even call as a utility class or global class, which is shared among all the test classes. Yeah, and this is what I have mentioned, test data factory. And so far we covered like how to write a test class and what is the syntax, and how can we cover the how can we see the how many number of lines executed, what are not executed, and what else we can do with the test class, and what else we are having in the test class. So first one is a test visible. What it will do. So let's say in this method, in one of the methods Subhash mentioned like if at all, I think I don't see here, but if at all you developed a method in your controller with a private, you given as access specifier as private for your method, and you want to access that method or you want to invoke that method from your test class, and it will not allow you until and unless you add an annotation called a test visible on top of the test method. And another one is test.load data. What it will do. So far I have given you like an overview how can you do how can you insert a setup data in the test class, right? So how is there any way you can even load your data, and so that I don't need to create setup method and all the stuff? You can also create you can also prepare a CSV file and you can load that in a static resource, and you can invoke that in a static resource in setup method or in whatever the method you want using the test.load data method. And the third one is system.run as. What it will do is, like, whenever you're dealing with sharing settings or role hierarchies, or whenever you're developing a manager package or applications, so this will definitely give you like this will definitely add some multiple scenarios. So what it will do is, let's say whatever you're developing the test class, you want to run that particular test class in a end user context, or you want to run that particular test class in a sales profile context, or a standard user context. So how it will behave. So if you want to go through all those scenarios, you need to add this, you need to insert a user record with the standard user profile, and you want to invoke this system.run as method and pass the user context in this particular method, so that whatever the method which is invoked using system.run as will gets executed under that particular user context. And finally, as I said earlier, test.start test and test.stop test, which will which will resets the Salesforce governor limits, and it will have their own set of governor limits. And another one, as a best practice we used to follow, whenever you are adding a validation tool directly in the production, on whenever you're making a admin kind of changes, make sure, actually we would like to not to do that directly in the production, as we usually follow as a best practice. We will do that first in the sandbox or in the dev org, then we'll make that change and we'll deploy that change to production. But at any cost, a admin is made a change in the production directly, as like a kind of adding a validation rule or created a workflow rule, whatever. Make sure you have to run all the test classes after you have made any changes, like in admin kind of, so that you don't need to get any issues in the after it went to the live. You can simply see the issues before itself, and you can clear those, or you can resolve those issues while whenever you're after seeing the test class itself. And these are the additional flavors we do have in the test class. And so far you're good to go with the test class development, and you know how to write a test class using setup data, and you are using the system.runners on all the stuff. Now, what are the considerations we have in the test class? So if you see in the code, whatever you have, like let's say I don't see any system.debug here. Let's say if at all Subhash added any system.debugs here, that will not count against your code coverage. So system.debugs will get skipped while the Salesforce is covering the running a method to cover the code coverage. And do not hard code any of the IDs in test class. This is maybe you can consider as a thumb rule, or you need to remember this whenever you're developing a test class, because each and every organization have their own set of ID. So you never ever hard code any IDs in test class. And whenever you hard code ID and you deploy to production, it will fail, and you will see another, and you need to again change the test class, and it will be another hectic process. And so far I said, like we have to, our test class should run with only the test data whatever you are inserting in the test class. It should not affect any of the test class should not depend on the original data. So what if you want to depend on original data, like kind of scenarios, price book entry record creation, or you want to access permission sets, or you want to access custom permissions. So for those kind of things, if you want, and like if you want to access organizational original data, use at is test all data equal to true, and that will give original Salesforce data, and you can access original records in the test class. But never ever do this, only in exceptional case you just add this to the respective methods. And test methods do not send any emails to the end user. So like let's say you have developed a particular method to send a invitation to the end user. So whenever you're developing, it should not send any email. And test methods can't make callouts. Like so far we didn't cover callouts, but I'm just giving a brief overview. So callouts is kind of invoking a external system from our the Salesforce. So you have a like you develop some REST service to invoke the external system and you're getting data. So you want to develop a test class for that. You test class will not make any callouts to external service. You have to prepare your own mock callouts, and so that you have to prepare your request and response in mock callouts. And last one, social will not give you the always social will give empty results whenever you're developing a test class. Make sure, if at all you want to use you want to depend on social results, use test.set fixed such results that will uh, that will that will exclude whenever you're developing a test class. And that's it from my end. And I think you guys if you have posted, we'll just walk through you guys. And thank you guys for listening patiently from past 20 minutes. Over to you, Shekhar.
Thank you, Yashwant, for the wonderful session. Nixon will continue. Yes, Nixon.
Thank you, Shekhar. Let me quickly bring my deck here. Okay, so yeah, by considering time, I will jump into the slide decks immediately, guys. But yeah, as everyone know, please do your purchase decision based on currently available product. And today's topic is order of execution. And hope everyone can see my screen, right? All right. All right. So what is order of execution? So basically, when your user creates a record by clicking the save button, or when we create records from code or API, it goes through a typical save process, right? So in that save process, it has n number of events to execute. Typically, it runs on insert, update, and upsert statement, and all events needs to be executed successfully to complete that save process. If you get any error at any point of time, the whole transaction will be rolled back. So this is complete save process. I would say it has about 21 steps. Let's break this down and get into the detail in following slides. But as you can see in very high level here, you always have few configurable features and coded features like before trigger or after trigger works together. So it starts from here and ends at here, but it goes through the whole cycle, and you see some circular dependency on this. So this is why understanding order of execution is always important. And this is not just for developers. This is for anyone who touches any automation element or automation tool in Salesforce. So why it is important to design the effective solution and a scalable solution, and to select the right automation tool. Let's say you have workflow, you have process builder, you have flows, you have triggers, but you should know when should we go with which tool because of this order of execution dependency. And you will be impacted if you are choosing wrong tool. For example, if you are choosing if you are having a trigger, a process builder, then, and even if you have workflow for a specific object, it formulates that save procedure again and again based on the actions you have, and that will cause a lot of unexpected results, which leads to unquality deliverable. And also it is very, very important to avoid hitting limits. For example, whenever the record goes through the save procedure, it could run the same program again and again, and that could increase the DML or SOCL statements. So that is why it is very important to consider. And before you do any solution design, it is very, very important. So as a developer or as an admin, you cannot skip it. you have to think through the full save cycle before you start using or deciding any automation tool. That is not just for the new requirement, you have to consider the existing implementation also as part of this. So let's get into the detail. So as you can see, it starts with initialization. So when your new record is inserted, then it starts with the initialization, or your record is updated, it starts with the load. Why this step is important? You are talking about old value in trigger or in configuration, you always check is changed or prior value, right? So you should know what was the original value before this particular save happened. So this step is very, very important to collect that value. And the next step is like, basically it overrides the value for the new record. Why it is important? You need the new trigger that new value to compare your old value and new value, and you should be able to access the new value for your business process. And when the request is initiated from UI, it runs all the UI specific or layout specific rules, like marking it as read only kind of thing, and it validates the field length, format, and field requiredness also. And if it is done through code or API, it checks the foreign key. For example, if in your account lookup field, if you set your opportunity ID value and try to update, it throws the error, right? So that happens at this particular step. So this one is some sequence of actions, a continuation to that. So as the first one you see here, step number 3 is before save updates. So in our day one of this session webinar series, you might notice we were talking about flow, and we said it is 10x faster than other automation tools. Why? Because it is happening early in the process, and it is happening before the record is committed to the database. So this is very critical, and this is new in Spring 20 release. So in earlier webinars, you might not see this, but it is very important to understand why this is coming here and why the before save flow is very fast. Then the next step, all the before triggers you have will be executed. And as Subhash mentioned, you don't have control on sequence of triggers executed in an object. Means if you have multiple triggers, you cannot control which trigger fires in which order. So that is why it is recommended to have one trigger per object, or at least one trigger event per object. So it happens, or it fires right after this flow. And then the next very important step is all the system validations or the custom validations happen here. For example, if you have a custom validation rule, it will not run before your before trigger or before save flow. So it is important to know that all your before trigger value and before save before flow value will be considered for this particular validation rule step. So the next step is duplicate rules. I hope everyone aware of that. So you can configure matching rules and duplicate rules to ensure there is no duplicate created in the system. And now this is the very important step. Here only the record saves to database, and it is not committed yet, but at this particular step, the ID will be created. So that is one main reason you will not get ID value in before insert trigger events, because ID is generated right after this particular step. This is not the case for before update, because the record is already there, you know the ID. But for before save or before insert trigger, why don't you get the ID? This is the main reason. Okay, here it runs all the after triggers. So now you have the ID, so you can do all your post-processing work, and it goes through the assignment rules. So this is only applicable for lead and case, and all your auto response rules runs right after that. So okay, I'm going fast, but it is important to understand which rules runs after what, because it has a dependency. Like on each stage there might be some value override. For example, assignment rules changes the value on the user record, right? So when the auto response rules fires, it considers the value from the newly overridden owner field value. And same thing for the workflow rule, because it fires after that only. So the next one, step number 2 is critical. Say after our workflow rules is evaluated, it updates the record here. Why it is important? because of the step number 13. If a workflow rule updates your record, it could be the same object or the parent object record, it runs all these steps. Let's get that detail over here. So it runs all your system validations, or your before trigger, after trigger, and just to make note, it is only one more time. It is not recursive like a number of times. It just runs the before update trigger and after update triggers only one more time. And if you note this particular note, if you read this, custom validations, flows, duplicate rules, or escalation rules are not run as part of this particular field update. So what is a big takeaway here? If we update a record using a workflow rule, these things will be skipped and only these elements will be fired. So that is very, very important to consider when you are troubleshooting any issue. So the next set of processes, it's like the process builder fires next. And if it has any record update action, it enforces the records to the whole save cycle. So the whole save cycle will be executed here. So if it is from process builder or flow launched process or flow or updates any record, this is fire like this. Then once this flow updates are fired, the escalation rules, entitlement rules will be fired. And here come the roll-up summary values are calculated. So usually formula fields are calculated when you are querying or accessing, but roll-up fields are calculated and stored in the particular record. So that is why here the parent record saves goes through the save cycle. And if the parent record has a roll-up field to the grandparent record, the grandparent record also goes through the save procedure. So last few steps here, like the criteria based sharing evaluation is happening here. So you can have n number of criteria based sharing rules per object, right? So it happens here. Once those things are done, then only the actual database commit happens. So this is where the record actually completely saved in the database. And here we have the post commit logic. Like if you have a logic to send email out or doing outbound call out kind of things, it will happen in the post commit logic. So just to recap what we have seen, the whole life cycle includes the browser level validations, the standard validations you set at field level, the custom validation you set at the object or validation rule level, all the code components like before trigger or after trigger, and it has your business automation rule criteria or elements like workflow, process builder, flow, and even the roll-up summary. All these elements or tools will have an impact on the solution you decide or design. So it is very much important to consider or run through the save flow each and every time when you are troubleshooting or designing the solution. That is a key takeaway from this session. And again, thank you for listening to this. I know this is very rushed, but if you have any questions, feel free to post in chat. We are happy to answer. And that's pretty much everything. And sorry, we are running 4 minutes late on this. Over to you, Shekhar.
Thank you for the wonderful session, Nixon. Purnima, can you run the poll? Purnima?
Yes, Shikhar, I just
Okay.
the first one.
Yeah, please. Are you able to run it?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think third question is done of the Subhash. And future methods can invoke other future methods. And what is the answer? Subhash, you want to share? Yeah, I think
59% has gone with the no. Let me to go with that.
okay. The next question, please, Purnima. Wow, it's mine, and I'll see. And last 5 seconds, Purnima, you can end up it. Yeah, you can end this question. And I too go with the majority, Subhash. And last one, Nixon's. Which one is executed first among these three? And you guys have last 20 seconds, validation rule, before triggers, after triggers, workflow rules. Nixon, you do see there is a tough, tight fight between validation rule and before triggers.
Yeah. I hope I mentioned that too.
I think, Purnima, you can end the poll.
Okay.
Okay, Subhash, you want to go and declare the result for us?
Yeah, I will go with that, Nixon. So here, I cannot go with the majority.
Yeah.
It's before triggers because before triggers can manipulate the DML data. So first, the before trigger will be executed. Only the final data that is to enter the database will be validated. So before triggers first, then validation rules.
Right on.
Yes.
All right. I think that's pretty much everything from our end, I believe.
Yes.
All right. So thank you guys. Thank you for joining us this wonderful session on a weekend day and staying late. And sorry, we will try to stick with our timeline as much as possible. Please be join on time, and we will be ending this session in time. All right. Thanks everyone. Let's meet tomorrow again. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Meet tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Yeah. Hey, guys. Have a nice weekend. Bye.